All right, thank you.
Mr. Haag, for the record, would you please go ahead and state your full name and spell your first and last name?
Lucian Conrad Haag, Lucien Haag.
And what is your occupation, sir?
I'm self-employed with my own forensic consulting firm, Forensic Science Services, in Carefree, Arizona.
What is it that you do?
My specialty has to do with firearms evidence, basic firearms identification.
Can you move up closer to the microphone, sir? I think you need to move up closer to the microphone.
All right. My work involves examining firearms and firearms evidence with a special emphasis on the reconstructive aspects of shootings.
Can you tell us what a criminalist is?
Yes, a criminalist covers the basic work of people in a crime laboratory, physical scientists who's involved with the testing and analysis of physical evidence, of course, firearms, tool marks, drugs, narcotics, blood stains, trace evidence, and so on. And
Would you describe
the firearms examination is a subset out of criminalistics.
So would you describe yourself as a criminalist?
Yes, I would.
And how long have you been employed as a criminalist?
For about 57 years now.
And I think you mentioned that you have your own independent consulting firm. Is that correct?
That's true.
And for whom did you work before you started your own independent consulting firm?
I worked for the city of Phoenix in the police crime laboratory, starting there in 1965 as an entry-level criminalist. I became the technical director of the laboratory, so I supervised all the various units, trained others in the various units of the crime laboratory when I elected to leave there in March of 1982. That's when my part-time consulting firm became my full-time employer.
And what were your specific duties there at the City of Phoenix Police Crime Laboratory?
Well, in the early years, through the 60s and 70s, I worked in the various areas of the laboratory: trace evidence, blood alcohol, comparative analysis, firearms unit. But my real interest and passion was the ballistics and firearms unit. So when I was a technical director, I was now training other people in all of these various units. But my main focus, again, had to do with not only basic firearms evidence, but I've said it once before, the reconstructive aspects, things like a distance determination, whether a bullet went through an intermediate target, areas that deal with how did the event occur or not.
Does your experience include firearms examination?
Yes, of course. That's the basic function in the firearms unit. I had specialized training in that subject after I left Cal Berkeley with my chemistry degree, a 2-year program in criminalistics at Cal State Long Beach, taught by the primary firearms examiner for the City of Los Angeles Crime Lab.
And do you have extensive experience in firearms forensic testing, or rather forensic testing of firearms?
Yes, as I said, I've been doing that for over half a century.
Now, it's my understanding that when you left the Phoenix Crime Lab in 1982, that's when your part-time consulting firm became full-time?
That's correct.
Do you continue to work full-time?
I'm trying to retire. I think I'm flunking retirement, but I've cut way back. I just have 5 or 6 cases, a lot of projects, but not casework. I think that's now limited down to 5 or 6 active cases.
Okay, great. Could you, hang on just a second. Have you conducted research in the area of criminalistics?
Yes, I have.
Have you written any articles or given presentations on the subject of firearms evidence and examinations?
Yes, a large number of them over the last almost 50 years. I think they number almost 200 now. Presentations before peer-reviewed groups. Many of those have become publications, and I've ultimately written a textbook on shooting incident reconstruction, co-authored by my younger son, Michael Haag.
Have you conducted seminars on the subject of firearms evidence and examination on more than one occasion?
Yes, many times.
Have you ever taught college-level courses in your field?
Yes, while I was at the City of Phoenix, they allowed me to adjust my work schedule so I could teach a 2-semester course in criminalistics. I did that for about 11 years at 2 community colleges here in the state of Arizona. I was certified in criminalistics as a criminalistics instructor by the state of Arizona.
And did the criminalistics courses include firearms evidence and examinations?
Yes, they did.
Are you a member of any professional associations or societies?
Yes, a number of them, starting closest to home, the California Association of Criminalists. I'm a regular member of that organization and have been for many years. The American Academy of Forensic Sciences covers the United States and a few foreign countries. And of course, the most important one is the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners, often referred to as AFTE. That is the worldwide organization of people that, almost all of which, with few exceptions, I being one of them, work in government crime laboratories in the firearms unit in this country and as many as 40 other industrialized countries.
In addition to testing and examining firearms, are you also personally familiar with firearms?
Yes, I am. I've been a shooter since childhood. I always had an interest in firearms and how they work. I was a competitive shooter when I was in high school. My high school actually had a rifle team. I competed in shooting events when I moved to Arizona. So, yes, I find them interesting. And they're also, of course, the subject of my profession.
Have you frequently been called to testify as an expert in court as a result of the various types of testing you've carried out on firearms and firearms-related evidence?
Many times.
Give us an estimate of how many times.
Well, I don't keep hard statistics, but certainly I'm sure over the last 50 years or so, it's over 1,000 occasions. A lot more when I was in the crime laboratory because, of course, those are criminal cases. So I could easily be in court once or twice a week for one kind of hearing or other or actual trial. It's much more infrequent now. It's more common that it's depositions because much of my work is civil, has to do with firearm misadventures, accidents, so on.
Have you been called by both the prosecution and the defense?
Yes, I have.
And how did you become involved in this case?
My recollection was a little over a year ago, a phone call from you.
And did you agree to consult and perform some examinations and some testing in this case?
Yes, I did.
So let's start at the beginning. Tell us if you can kind of walk us through the initial examination that you did and any testing that you did and the evidence. And specifically, I know that you took a lot of firearms into evidence. I want to speak with you today specifically regarding the firearm that you understand to have been the firearm that was in Mr. Baldwin's possession.
Yes, well, my work began with, as they all do, and getting an understanding of what the issues were in the case. So I was reading a lot of documents, looking at interviews, both audio and transcribed interviews of a number of individuals, including Mr. Baldwin, a man named Seth Kenny, the armorer, other people who were present on the scene, looking at the sheriff's reports of what sort of evidence was impounded. And of course, we all know the physical evidence ultimately went to the FBI laboratory. So I needed to see and ultimately was provided the examiner's, not only his reports, but his worksheets and notes. So every investigation, at least my approach is to learn everything I can about the issues in the case, what people collected, what they state they saw. Not that it's evidence, but it's a starting point to decide what kind of tests and in what order are such tests appropriate. Ultimately, in July of last year, just a couple of days, as I recall, before the 4th of July, I had sent a list of all the things I wanted to see. It was pretty extensive, things that were impounded. And of course, included what I'll call the evidence Pietta revolver. It's easily distinguishable from all the other prop guns of the same design and caliber because it's got a nickel-plated hammer. The ammunition, now there's basically 3 types of ammunition in this case. They're blanks. These are cartridges that can't hold.
Mr. Haag, I'm going to stop you right there. Go ahead and skip the ammunition because I don't think that's relevant to this motion. So we'll save some time there. So I understand that you examined the ammunition. So specifically with regard to the Pietta, take us through what you did with that gun.
Yes, well, my son and I received it in a pistol box, evidence type box. It was partially disassembled. There were some broken parts, a severely damaged hammer, broken trigger, the tip of which is called a sear, and a thing, the company calls it a bolt. It's also known as a cylinder stop latch. So we photographed the gun as found, ultimately replaced the broken parts after they were thoroughly examined and photographed with comparable parts that were functionally measurably equivalent. And by that, I mean a hammer trigger with an operating sear and a cylinder stop latch. As soon as we did that, the gun was functional.
So can you specifically explain to the court exactly what parts of the gun were damaged?
Has three parts. This is a very simple design. There's a hammer that has to be manually retracted with the thumb. So that's a volitional, purposeful act. Inside of the gun is a portion of the trigger that can't be seen until you disassemble it. And that's called the sear, S-E-A-R. It's the top of the trigger. And finally, the third part that was broken is called bolt or cylinder stop latch. This is a small component that, as the cylinder in this revolver rotates into position as you cock the hammer, it locks the cylinder in alignment with the axis of the barrel. So those three parts were broken, and in the case of the trigger, truly broken, snapped. And the hammer, just the full cock step or notch. There are three notches on the hammer. The full cock notch was essentially obliterated.
I want to use a demonstrative aid just so that we can see exactly those parts and how those parts interact. This is not something I'm asking to have admitted into evidence. It's just a demonstrative aid for the court.
I think, no, Kari, is it among the things that you sent over yesterday or last night or yesterday? Do I have it?
No, it's a demonstrative aid. I sent you exhibits.
Okay, I guess I don't know if I have an objection without seeing it.
Your Honor, it's a video that shows the working of a single action Army revolver, and it's an X-ray version, so it shows you all of the internal parts that you can't see from the outside. That's it.
Kari, is it Grand Jury 31?
Yes.
Yeah, no objection. You did send it.
Oh, I did. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, let's take a look.
Let me see if I can get it to present. Can you see that?
I can.
I'm going to jump up here. I'm going to get us to a certain spot that I think might be helpful. Mr. Haag, can you see my cursor?
I don't see your oh, yes. Okay. I see it.
Down here on the trigger?
Oh, no, I think I'm looking at my cursor. Yes. I don't see your cursor. Oh,
Can
now
I-
I do. Now I do. It's black. I was looking for a white cursor.
Okay, I apologize. And I'll try to keep it off the black mark. Is that the trigger of the gun there?
Yes.
So I know that you can't see it, but what's this thing that we see here? If you can see my cursor, what's this thing above the hammer that we can see?
Yes, I'm not sure. It looks like it's a part of the mechanism to operate the cylinder stop latch, which if you come up just a little further, there, that's the cylinder stop latch, and those little ears on it were broken.
Are you talking about these little ears right here?
Yes, there are actually two of them with an opening between them, but one of them was broken off on the evidence.
So when you say that there's two of these little ears, let me stop real quick. Is this big piece of metal here that my cursor's on, is that the hammer?
Yes, it is.
And what's this here?
The firing pin.
So these ears here that you're referring to, does one go on one side of the hammer and one goes on the other side of the hammer?
Yes.
And what's this here?
It looks like a spring, a stop or a spring to limit the movement.
The movement of what?
The cylinder stop latch.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to jump ahead. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Can you tell us what we are looking at right here? Do you see my cursor?
Yes. This shows an internal view of the trigger and hammer at the full forward or rest position. The top of that trigger is the sear, and it is not engaged in any notch. It's just resting against the working surface of the hammer. So that hammer is fully forward. If we had a live cartridge in the gun, the firing pin would be resting against the primer of a live cartridge, an unsafe condition.
So when you say that's the position that we're in right now, is this our firing pin right here where my cursor is?
Yes, it is.
And so would that firing pin in this position be resting on a bullet if there was a bullet in that chamber?
Or more correctly, be resting on the primer of a cartridge. The bullet is up in the front end of the cartridge.
Understood. I apologize for my mistaken terminology. So this here is the sear, is that correct?
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about these notches that we can see here on the hammer.
Right. If the hammer were to be retracted just about a quarter of an inch, that sear tip on the trigger would snap into that notch that's right next to it in this view. That's the safety notch, sometimes called the quarter cock notch. Now the hammer and firing pin cannot reach the cartridge. If we go to the next notch, basically just opposite the hole in the pivot hole in the hammer, that's the half cock or loading notch. In that position, the hammer will be halfway back. The cylinder will now be free to rotate, so you can spin the cylinder, whereas before you could not because the stop latch we previously talked about is holding it in place. And finally, this one's hard to see because it's really just a step, but much further down at about the, about the 7 o'clock position, that's the full cock. I like to call it a step, but it's often called a notch. So imagine retracting that hammer, trigger just rotates backward. It's going to rest. The sear is going to rest on that step with the hammer fully cocked. So when the trigger is pulled, the hammer, driven by a spring that we can see over there in the grip, a flat spring, the hammer is driven forward and goes all the way down. And if there's a live round in the chamber, fires the gun.
Okay, so why don't I'm going to go ahead and play this, and let's just walk through it. Is that what you're talking about right there?
Yes, the person has now pulled the hammer back to the full cock position, and it will stay there in a properly operating gun until the trigger is pulled.
So when we're in this position right here, is that the quarter cock position? If those two were engaged, they're not totally engaged in this video?
Yes, they are not engaged, but if the trigger rotated so that the sear, the top part, is deep in that notch, you would be in the quarter cock or so-called safety position. That would be the loading position. Again, the sear would be deeply into that notch. It's truly a notch. And the cylinder would now be capable of being rotated by the hand of the user to rotate it around and either take fired cartridges out or put live cartridges in.
So in this position, that's where the cylinder spins.
I'm sorry, could you ask the question again?
When the hammer is in this position, you can move the cylinder.
Yes, you just take your fingers and rotate it clockwise.
And then I think you indicated that this is our full cock position here, and this is the position when the gun is ready to fire. Is that right?
That's right. And the stop latch is sort of ghosted in this image, has now popped up, and it's in one of those notches you can see on the cylinder, locking it in place. So it's aligned with the axis of the barrel.
Okay, thank you. Let me move to a couple of exhibits. Bear with me. I'm sorry, I'm not as proficient with presenting when I'm on Google Meets. I'm going to show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 35. Do you see this photograph, sir?
Yes, I do.
Do you see this? Okay. Can you explain to us what we're looking at here?
The one you had your cursor on just a moment ago, the one that's silver colored with really fine lines on it. No, the one to the right.
Hang on, let me get right here.
Nope, move it over. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the working surface of one of the triggers from one of these guns. That's the way they would look when they come from the manufacturer. Those are finishing marks, very fine grinding marks on the working surface. So you're looking right down on the top of the trigger. The one on the left that looks sort of golden.
Let me stop you right there. Are we looking at the top of the sear?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And what's the one on the left?
That's the severely damaged working surface of the broken off sear from the evidence revolver.
Can you explain to us in real life, because when we're looking at these photos, can we get an idea of this part right here of the gun, the sear, either one of these parts, how big are they?
I would say about 1/8 of an inch from top to bottom as you view these. Think of it like you're looking down on the tip of a fairly small screwdriver, looking right down on the working surface of a screwdriver. Same idea.
And approximately how wide would this be?
Probably a couple hundredths of an inch, 0.02, 0.03.
Was this photograph taken using any special equipment that shows all of these details?
Yes, that's what's called a stereo zoom microscope, where we could put a camera under the microscope focus it and take the pictures.
So you are actually using a microscope to look at these very fine marks. They are that small.
Yes, and lighting is, you have to bring in lighting from the side to highlight them.
Okay, pardon me. Mr. Haag, I just want to, let's cut to the chase and let's talk briefly about these markings on the very tip of that sear that you described to be about as big as the tip-top surface of a flathead screwdriver. Is that right?
And a small one at that.
Okay. Do those, in your opinion, would markings like that, those microscopic marks that you see on the tip of that very, very small piece of metal, would they affect the functionality of the gun at all?
Well, the ones from the manufacturer, of course, the answer is no. All the triggers that we looked at typically have those very fine, perfectly parallel striae. The evidence one, on the other hand, if it affected it at all, it stands to make what shooters call a creepy trigger. It would grate. But those marks aren't from a trigger job or from the manufacturer. It's damage.
Okay, let's back up. In terms of all of the things that you've reviewed, did you review videos from the filming of the movie Rust as a part in order to form conclusions in this case?
That was a part of my work, and I think I've at this point viewed more than 20 videos of Mr. Baldwin handling the evidence firearm.
And did you also review all of the FBI report in this case?
Yes, I did.
And based on, let me ask you this, have you come across anything in the videos that you've seen or in the FBI report or any of the transcripts of the testimony that you've reviewed? Have you come across anything that would indicate that this gun malfunctioned?
No, I have not.
So I want to go kind of in chronological order, and I want to go through some of the videos that you've watched of Mr. Baldwin on the set of Rust. Bear with me here, because what happens to these exhibits is when they sit too long, I can no longer access them. Even though they are right in front of me, I can't get them to display. So, Mr. Haag, did you review a series of videos that from the filming of Rust that were recorded on October 16th of 2021?
I believe so. I didn't write the dates down, but if it's something you sent me, I looked at it extensively.
Well, along with those videos, were you provided the dates?
I believe so.
Okay.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the evidence that the videos as not relevant to this inquiry about the condition of the gun.
Do you want my response?
Yes, please.
Well, the defense's entire position has been the gun wasn't functioning properly. There had to have been something wrong with it. That was the cross-examination of Mr. Ziegler. I am here to show you numerous videos of the gun functioning exactly the way it should. And we have an expert here who's looked at the videos, and he can tell you this is exactly how it's supposed to work.
All right. Were you not provided these, Ms. Clark?
She was.
We were
right.
provided videos, Your Honor. I'm not sure which
Okay.
one she's showing, and it seems like an awful lot of video footage for something that I think is tangentially relevant at best.
All right, overruled. Thank you.
Mr. Haag, can you see that video?
Yes, I can.
Does this look like a video that you've watched at my request?
Yes.
Little closer.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna run in.
No, just,
Yeah?
just.
When you drop your arm, that means he's 10 feet away.
Closer.
I can't see how close he is, but I want to be almost up by the time he gets here.
No, I'm gonna go into this.
Yeah.
Well, 'cause let me show you something. Hold on. Step back to your original mark. So 1,000, 1,000, 3, I'm getting up.
Right.
Then when he drops his arm, Helena, get out. He drops his arm. That means Brady's close. I'm going to start to really get up.
Okay.
Here we go. Let's try it.
And everyone
Rolling,
doesn't need to be right here, like in the path of the gun. Could you please move?
Just want to be over him a little bit so I can see it.
Just don't want to put any pop up.
Now, wait a second. If I'm going to shoot right, do you want to go on the other side of the camera? I don't want to shoot toward you. Okay. I'm going to shoot close to you. Here we go.
Okay.
Here we go. Ready. And action. Go. what? Motherfucker.
Mr. Haag, in this video, can you see Mr. Baldwin firing his gun?
Yes, handling it earlier and then ultimately firing it multiple times.
Given your vast experience with firearms, and to be clear, you also have considerable experience with single action army revolvers, is that right?
Yes, I do.
Is there anything about what you saw that causes you to feel like the gun was malfunctioning or not working properly?
No, not at all.
In everything that you've read about the case, the hundreds of pages of police reports and transcripts, have you ever seen anyone read anywhere where anyone said this gun wasn't functioning properly?
I think I need to hear the question again. I missed the first part of it. Sorry.
In the documents that you reviewed, police reports, transcripts of witness testimony, did you see anything where anyone claimed that the gun wasn't working properly?
No, I did not.
And that's Hannah Gutierrez's statements, right?
I'm sorry?
Did you review Hannah Gutierrez's statements?
Yes, I'm sorry. For statement and interview,
Did you review Mr. Baldwin's statements?
several of them are interviews as well.
Did you review any statements from Mr. Halls, the assistant director?
At some point I did, yes.
Any of those people ever say this gun had a problem or wasn't functioning properly?
No.
Let me see if it will let me switch easily. So I just showed you what was marked as State's Exhibit 8. I'm going to now show you State's Exhibit 9. Can you see that?
I can, yes.
While I understand that it looks at the beginning to be the exact same as the video we just watched, I'm going to play it, okay?
All right.
Take your only mark. And set.
Ready, and action. Grab the rifle.
Any problems you see there with the way that gun functioned?
No.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 10.
Your Honor, I'm just going to object again. It's cumulative. We've been at this for a long time, and these exhibits are all going to show the same thing unless I'm very much mistaken.
Well, but the problem, Judge, is that the entire claim that is the basis of this motion is that the gun was modified prior to it going to the FBI. Now, the only way that that works for the defendant's motion is if any modification, no matter how slight, affected the functionality of the gun. That's what the entire motion's about. So if the defendant wants to stipulate that at no time during the filming of the movie the gun ever malfunctioned, I don't have to show these videos.
Overruled.
Hey, Mark.
So, Joe? Yeah. I'm not gonna open the door till the first squib hits
Take
the
mark.
door. Right. So door, squib hits, open door, another squib while it's opening, and then I charge out. Ready?
Set.
Stand by, let Joe get to the monitor. All right,
Set.
video, ready, and action.
Mr. Haag, did you get a better view in State's Exhibit 10 of Mr. Baldwin and his gun?
Yes, actually each one of them has some value, but this one you can see the hammer being cocked in one of the discharge scenes, letting go of the hammer, it does not fall from the full cock, and then he fires it with a normal trigger pull.
Any functionality problems that you can tell?
No, there are none.
That gun works exactly as it should, is that right?
As intended and as designed by the manufacturer.
State's Exhibit 11.
Hey, Mark. Take mark. You good? And set.
Set, ready, and action.
Mr. Haag, State's Exhibit 11. Any problems with the functionality of that gun?
No.
State's Exhibit 12.
Hey, Mark. Take mark. Set. Set.
Ready, and action.
One more. I forgot to recall stuff. No, right away. Let's reload.
Here we go.
Mr. Haag, any malfunction you can see in State's Exhibit 12?
No.
Your Honor, we'd stipulate that these can be admissible for the hearing and that these videos will show proper functioning of the firearm in an effort to expedite this for purposes of this hearing.
How many
Will-
more? Which ones? 13 through what?
This is, Judge, it's going to be 13 through 32.
All right, so the defense is stipulating that 13 through 32 show the functioning, what's the proper terminology? Functioning of the gun, but
It
what's-
will not show any malfunction of the firearm in those exhibits that the state has submitted for purposes of this hearing, and that Mr. Haag will say that. We will stipulate that Mr. Haag will say that they do not show any malfunction of the firearm.
I don't think that's Judge, I don't think that's good enough. They need to stipulate, not that he will say that there isn't a malfunction with the firearm, but they need to say that there is not, in fact, a malfunction of the firearm in any of these videos.
Okay, so Your Honor, our stipulation is that he will say that because this is an examination of Mr. Haag, and my understanding is what we're interested in is what he will testify to about these videos. But otherwise, if the state wants to play them all and the court wants to watch them all,
I don't want to watch them all. I don't want to watch that many more exhibits. So we're not going to fight over this. Is it that he can testify that the gun was functional for 13 and 32?
Okay, he can testify that the gun was functional for 13 and 32. Mr. Haag, have you viewed many videos from the filming of the set of arrest?
At least 20.
Have you seen any that cause you any concern about the functionality of the gun?
No.
All right.
No. Okay, I'll move on, Judge. Let me stop.
There's D10120-2004-00013, State of New Mexico versus Alexander Ray Baldwin. Parties state their name.
Kari Morrissey and Erlinda Johnson.
Before I anticipate what I might be asked, a hammer's going to fall.
With regard to the spent casing, Mr. Haag, if you recall, just as a point of clarification, two or more of the videos that you reviewed, were they actually recorded on October 21st?
I believe so. They're in the mock church.
And with those videos that were recorded on October 21st, no problem with the functionality of the gun, right?
None that I could see.
Now, sir, when you reviewed the FBI report in this case and you saw that there was accidental discharge testing that took place, did you have any concerns about that testing that we understand ultimately damaged the gun?
Yes, I would say I did.
Tell us about that.
Well, fortunately, it comes at the end of a long list of tests, but it looks like it arose because Mr. Ziegler's understanding was this was an accidental discharge. An accident, as I've defined it in my book, means there's something wrong with the gun, not the user. So he pressed on with their SOP, their protocol, their standard operating procedure, to look into, to evaluate accidental discharge again, meaning there's something wrong with the gun. And that procedure involved some pretty aggressive, well, very aggressive final testing by delivering an impact to the cocked hammer with a rawhide mallet, multiple blows. And as we probably all know, that caused a failure of the sear and the hammer.
Do you agree, however, that testing was done pursuant to FBI procedures and protocols?
Yes, it was, if there's a suggestion or an indication of an accidental discharge.
And do you agree that experts may agree in terms of what kind of testing they think is necessary to ascertain opinion?
You can, or I have found differences in an approach to solving a question in laboratories, including my own.
Now, let me show you what has been marked as, I think it's going to be State's Exhibit 37. Is there someone that's unmuted that has background noise? It's not me.
It's quiet here. I do have a ceiling fan.
It's probably me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Judge. Can you see that there? That says State's Exhibit 37.
Yes, I can.
And can you tell us what we're looking at here?
You are looking at a profile view of the severely damaged evidence hammer, where we can see the quarter-cock notch, which is in good shape, dirty, but it works. The half-cock notch, which is undamaged. But then we go to the pivot point, the hole. There should be a right angle step there, and it's completely obliterated.
Let me ask you, the quarter-cock notch here that we're looking at, does that appear to be excessively worn or create any functionality issues with the gun, in your opinion?
Well, two parts of your question. It's not going to get wear because you just have the sear resting in that notch. There's no movement there. It just sits down in that notch. And I've already forgotten the second part of your question. It's not damaged. It's just got some debris on it.
So nothing about this quarter cock notch, in your opinion, would cause any functionality difficulties with the gun.
No, nor did
Eh,
that when I examined it.
Okay. And this notch here, this is the half cock notch. Is that right?
Or loading notch, two names for the same thing.
Any problems with that?
No, it's undamaged
So,
and it worked when I examined it.
and we'll get to that examination here shortly. So this, your concern, what's abnormal about this hammer in this photo is that the full cock notch is missing. Is that right?
Yes, it's just basically rounded off or broken off, sheared off.
Did you form an opinion about how that damage to the full cock notch occurred?
There's only one choice, and that's the impact testing that Mr. Ziegler applied to it at the end of his protocol.
So, just to confirm, it is not your opinion that this damage to the full cock notch existed prior to Mr. Ziegler's accidental discharge testing. Is that correct?
That's correct. It did not exist prior to that testing.
I'm going to show you States Exhibit 38 for comparison. What are we looking at here?
You're looking at a pristine hammer, one of the number of hammers that my son and I had. I think I bought two. We disassembled several out of our own guns. The only problem, it's not a problem with this picture, it's just flipped right left. So now the half cock notch is on the right and the load notch is in the middle. And the full cock notch is by that large hole that you see. And there you can see a complete, perfectly formed and finished full cock step or notch.
Okay. And what you're talking about is this right here.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to show you States Exhibit 40. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Yes, I assembled 3 hammers, undamaged hammers, from this make and model of gun. And nearest you is the evidence hammer. So it's a total of 4, but there's the evidence hammer, and it's they're on a rotating pin. You can see what looks like a screw there, so I can align them easily. And if one is so inclined, you can come across and look at the various notches and see that they're all in agreement. They're indistinguishable as far as dimensions and shape and so on, until we get to that full cock step or notch on the evidence hammer, the one that looks silver and is nearest you in this view. Yes, right there. And if you then look at the notches in the 3 hammers next to it, there's no comparison. The evidence notch is effectively gone.
Did you do some additional testing of this gun in August of 2023?
Yes, I did, with the help of my son.
So let me ask you, before we talk specifically about that testing, prior to doing that testing, had you already formed an opinion that the full cock notch of the evidence hammer was damaged by FBI testing and was not damaged prior to testing by the FBI?
Yes,
How are you able to do that?
a number of ways. First of all, you've already asked me about all the videos that show the gun working properly. Then a real detailed examination of the FBI lab report showed multiple ways that this gun was working properly. Photographs of the hammer at full cock, trigger pull test, probably the most important test, because they give a numerical value for what sort of force must be applied to the trigger and a cocked hammer to fire the gun. And that Mr. Ziegler, successfully test fired the gun at least 12 times with live ammunition. So putting all those together, it's clearly working fine until he gets to that point. And by his own description, the hammer and trigger failed during that test. That's why they repackaged it the way they did. They took it apart. The FBI laboratory, took it apart to see what had failed. They recovered those parts, the hammer you're looking at here, the broken trigger, and the stop latch, and put them in a separate little container inside the pistol box.
So, Mr. Haag, when you did your forensic testing of the gun prior to August, did you have to replace the parts in order to put the gun back together?
Absolutely.
So you replaced those 3 broken parts to put it back together.
That's correct, with equivalent parts that are dimensionally identical, indistinguishable from the broken parts, except for the damage, of course.
And where did you obtain those parts so that you would know that they were the same as came from the manufacturer?
My recollection is the hammer and trigger came out of my son's Pieta Colt 45. We had others to choose from, but that's my present recollection. They were all indistinguishable. I think we used his. The trigger might have been mine, one of the ones I purchased, but they were intercompared with a group of new or parts out of working guns to effectively return the evidence gun to normal condition.
Were they all Pieta parts?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, we've seen numerous videos of the gun working properly when it's in Mr. Baldwin's hands. In August of 2023, at my request, what kind of additional testing did you do?
We put the imaged hammer that you're looking at in this view in the evidence gun, but a new or undamaged trigger and a new undamaged stop latch. So this would isolate the performance of the damaged hammer.
What was the point to that testing?
It was to determine despite that damage to the full cock step, would the hammer remain at the full cock position when you manually cock the hammer back? That was part one. If it didn't, would the half cock notch capture the falling hammer, which is what it should do if you have either a slip off or a full cock notch that's so damaged that it won't hold the full cock position. So 2 parts.
And when you conducted that testing, did you make a video?
Yes, we did.
I'm going to show you, I think these are fortunately mislabeled, but I believe these exhibits should be 33 and 34, and they are in the folder that was provided that's marked Exhibit 33 through 34, August 24th, 2023. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 33. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
And what are we looking at?
Looking at the evidence revolver, we can tell it by that silver nickel-plated hammer, which differentiates it from all the other prop guns. Of course, the cylinder and cylinder pin have been removed in this particular picture or video.
So this is the original hammer missing the full cock notch, has been put back in the gun, and all the other parts are working fine. Is that right?
Yes, and all the pins, all the springs are the same. So the only thing that's different now is this mixed hammer.
Okay, but we've got a working trigger and we've got a working bolt. Oh, I'm sorry. We don't have the bolt in this video.
I'm not sure.
Okay, let's go ahead and play it.
This is August 24th, 2023, in the property room, Santa Fe Sheriff's Office. And Mike, you're on to describe what we've done to the evidence gun.
So it's the item 1 revolver, the Pieta. Original parts include all the pins, screws, grip, the original hammer. It has the original hammer spring as well as the original flat spring that operates the trigger. The trigger is a replacement trigger, so the top of the sear is a functioning original piece. And as said, original hammer, it does have a replacement bolt as well. Otherwise, all parts are original.
Okay, and the hammer's in the fully forward position. The hammer falls, doesn't hold, but the half cock notch captures it. Let's do it again.
I'll take it all the way down. You can see the quarter cock notch also functions, half cock functions, and then all the way to full.
And it fails to hold, but is captured at the half cock.
I'll apply some.
So, Mr. Haag, if that hammer had been damaged the way that it is now, would Mr. Baldwin have been able to shoot that gun the way that he did in the videos?
No.
Would Mr. Ziegler have been able to test fire the gun 12 times?
Not in the normal way. No, he would not.
And Your Honor, for time saving, we have State's Exhibit 34 is just kind of a different version of that video, so I don't have to show it as long as it's a part of the record. Unless anyone wants me to show it, I'm happy to. All right.
You don't need to show it for me. What is Ms. Clark saying? Anything?
No, no need to show it for me.
So we know that the damage to the hammer could not have existed prior to April, I think, of 2022 when the FBI did their accidental discharge testing. Is that correct?
I would agree with that. Yes.
And you concluded that the markings on the very tip of that sear did not affect the functionality of the gun. Is that correct?
Right.
Now, in that regard, let me ask you, did you issue a supplemental report August 31st of 2022?
I believe so. Yes. Third and final report.
What's that?
Third and final report in this work.
Thank you, sir. And in that report, did you give any kind of an opinion about whether or not those markings that we could see in the photos that we looked at earlier were caused by the accidental discharge testing?
No, at that time I was uncertain and I gave an open-ended comment that I couldn't explain them given the lack of information I had at that time concerning the history of the gun and the nature of Mr. Ziegler's testing.
Well, specifically, Mr. Haag, did you say in your report that you thought that it was unlikely that those markings were the result of Mr. Ziegler's accidental discharge testing?
I did say that, or write that.
And let me ask you, at the time that you wrote that report, how much information did you have about the manner in which Mr. Ziegler conducted his accidental discharge testing? And specifically, I'm talking about the striking of the hammer with the mallet.
Only very, very limited information that he used a rawhide mallet. Beyond that, I knew nothing at that time.
So recently, did you make a request to speak to Mr. Ziegler?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about the circumstances of that.
Well, this was somewhat troubling because these marks that you've seen earlier, which exhibit it is, are on a diagonal. I hope you can see my hand here, rather than perfectly back to front, which I would have expected if the blow to the hammer that caused the trigger and sear to fail was delivered with a perfectly back to front blow. So I needed to get more details. I assumed, it was obviously wrong, that they had a special fixture, a rig, an apparatus to hold the gun and swing the blow so it came square on. In that interview just a few days ago, I learned that it was free swung, so we don't have any numerical impact values in terms of kinetic energy. And he conceded in a free hand swing, there could have been a side component. In other words, instead of 0 back to front, coming in at, let's say, 80 or 90. He was unable to clarify that other than he conceded, yes, we can have a side blow. That could explain my puzzlement, really, about why they're diagonal. I would have expected them at the time to be perfectly back to front. So that clearly offered an explanation. The other is maybe logic or common sense are less and less common, but if the hammer got that badly damaged, something serious had to happen to the sear tip. And really the only choice is the impact testing, despite the fact that the marks, the really egregious marks on that sear, have an angular component.
So after speaking to Mr. Ziegler and getting more information about the manner in which he conducted his accidental discharge testing, did that cause you to change your opinion as to whether or not those markings at the very tip of the sear were caused by the FBI testing?
Yes.
So what's your opinion today?
It's really the only choice, just by
Okay.
simple logic and the history of the gun, and now more information about the impact testing.
Now, hypothetically, let's say that these strange markings at the very tip of the sear, let's say that they weren't caused by the FBI and that they did exist during the filming of the movie. In your opinion, would they have affected the functionality of the gun at all?
They would not, and they did not.
And is it unusual in your line of work that you would meet and speak to other experts about your opinions?
No, not at all. I just have to do it through the attorneys involved.
Okay. And just to be clear, when you attended that meeting with Mr. Ziegler, that was something that you requested from us, correct?
If anyone wanted to get past why I was so puzzled by the diagonal marks, and clearly, yes, I needed to know more.
Just to follow up, kind of close the loop on a couple of other things. In the testing that you conducted with regard to the spent casing from the set of rust. So when I say the spent casing, I mean the spent casing that appears to be the casing from the fatal bullet. You did testing on that, correct?
Yes.
And based on can you explain the kind of testing that you did?
Yes. Well, first of all, I had Mr. Ziegler's what are called photo micrographs. He took excellent pictures of a comparison. So I could see that the evidence cartridge, before I ever put it under the microscope, had achieved normal operating pressures. In other words, when a gun goes off, the cartridge is slammed back against the breech face. I also test-fired cartridges, same caliber, same brand, and did the same comparison. The only difference is I used a 3D scanning device. He used a normal microscope. They're both up to the task. And I, too, could easily match a test-fired cartridge with that particular cartridge case, impounded as being the fatal cartridge.
Were you able to determine from firing pin depth impressions what position the hammer of the gun was in when the fatal bullet was fired?
Yes.
What position was the hammer in?
In my opinion, from my testing and all the test-fired cartridges I had from the FBI laboratory, it's a normal hammer fall from a full cock position, as opposed to what might be called a slip off, where someone is trying to lower a hammer, or they've got it at the quarter cock and they miss it and it slips, the hammer falls. The firing pin impressions there, this is by actual testing, will be substantially, visually, measurably different. So it's a normal hammer fall from the full cock position, in my opinion.
Your Honor, in terms of time, do you want us to keep going?
I don't have any other spot for you. How much longer are we going to take?
I don't have that much longer with Mr. Haag. You should be able to wrap it up. I just wanted to check in with you because I think it's 5 o'clock.
It is, but as I said, I don't have any other spots for you. So thank you.
Okay, no problem. Mr. Haag, can you describe that one would engage in to remove the firing pin, the process from a Pieta single action army, and reinstall that firing pin? Is that easy? Is it complicated? What happens?
No, it's easy. You just need an appropriate punch. It's not going to mar the hole. If you look at the pictures of the hammer, you can see the firing pin, literally a little pivot pin about which it rotates. That's driven out. The firing pin falls out. And now you've got a gun you could take to a trade show and meet their requirements of not having a firing pin. To put it back, again, you align the firing pin with the hole in the hammer, reinsert that pin and just tap it till it's flush on both sides, usually with a brass driver, a gunsmith tool.
Okay, let me just review my notes real quick. Sorry. And just to correct the record, I think I indicated that the testing that Mr. Haag did in August was in 2022. I just wanted to correct that. It was actually in 2023. I'll pass the witness.
Cross-exam.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Haag. I want to start back with your review of the FBI's report and your conclusions regarding the FBI's exam. So you reviewed the FBI's report in July of last year. Is that correct?
Yes.
And over the course of your review of that and other materials, you determined that the testing the FBI did was completely unnecessary. Is that correct?
No, all the testing they did until we got to the point of the accidental discharge test. That was unnecessary if the person, in this case, Mr. Ziegler, knew more about the issues.
So just to put a finer point on my question, you would agree that the testing that Mr. Ziegler did, the accidental discharge testing, was unnecessary in light of the circumstances of this case?
Yes, I would, and I do.
Okay, and you would not recommend that testing based on the circumstances of this case if you were in Mr. Ziegler's shoes?
I would not have if the firearm had come to my laboratory.
And your understanding is that Mr. Ziegler did not disassemble or document the internal components of the firearm before he conducted the destructive testing?
That's right, he did not.
But you and your son did disassemble and photograph parts of multiple firearms in the course of your testing in this case, is that correct?
I think we disassembled 9 Pietas that were prop guns, and both my son and I have the brother to the evidence gun, same make, model, barrel length, so on. So we have 11 examples.
And you do that because you want to document the condition of those firearms on receipt, is that correct?
I'd say it was a little more than that in the sense of here they are, let's have a look. I already know what they look like inside, but it would just be a question someone might raise. Did you ever examine the interior of any of those other guns? I want to be able to say, yes, we looked at them all.
And is that something that you would routinely do in the course of a firearms examination?
You're a little scratchy in the audio. I missed that one, sorry.
Is that something that you would routinely do, disassembling the firearms and documenting them in your experience as a firearms examiner?
Boy, I'm sorry, I'm still missing it.
Is everyone else having a tough time?
I hear you, but it's
Your
really,
voice is just a little raspy, but why don't you turn the volume up? Maybe that's the problem.
And maybe speak a little slower.
Okay, I think I have it as high as it can go. Can you hear me now?
that's better.
Okay, so my question is, when you undertake to examine a firearm, do you commonly disassemble and document the internal components?
It's going to depend on what the issues are, what the context of the case is. If it's an alleged, and there's a difference, if it's an alleged accidental discharge, that's a gun problem. And yes, if it's an alleged unintentional discharge, the gun may not necessarily need to be disassembled.
Okay, and based on the circumstances of this case, you said you disassembled 9 Pietas as well as 2 additional firearms that you had in your possession?
Yes,
Okay, and how long does it take to take those guns apart?
that's pretty much a day's work.
For each gun?
About a day's work. My son did most of it. I watched. He's better at it than I am.
Okay. And would you consider it good practice to document those internal components?
I missed part of your question. Would I consider it?
Good practice to document those components.
Again, it's going to depend upon the issues. Certainly in a civil case where the gun manufacturer is a defendant and there's an allegation of a compromised gun, you bet everything's going to get photographed and measured.
Okay, and you did it in this case, so you presumably thought it would be a good thing to do in this case?
I think we did photograph all the various parts from the various guns.
You described, we've spoken before, you described to me previously a test called a push-off test. Push-off test?
Oh yes, push-up, sorry.
Okay. And would you agree that, and can you tell me what a push-off test is?
Yes, it's going to be easier to demonstrate. Here's the brother to the evidence gun. There's the full cock position. And you just put pressure with your thumb. Push maybe 2 or 3 pounds of force. And if that full cock notch is mixed, the hammer's going to fall and it's going to be captured, as we've seen in the video, at the half cock notch.
And is it fair to say that a push-off test is not destructive?
Clearly it is not.
Okay. And would that have been a more appropriate test given the circumstances of this case, in your opinion?
It would have been a useful test. If the hammer held at that point, then we're back to your earlier question. I wouldn't see if I knew more about the case and was in Mr. Ziegler's position. to go beyond that.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm clear, in your opinion, would it have been appropriate to do a push-off test in this case?
It's certainly appropriate in my laboratory. It's common. It's just part of my worksheet. If again, there's an allegation of an accidental discharge, a hammer fall without a trigger pull.
And is it your understanding Mr. Ziegler did not conduct that test?
That's my understanding.
Okay, and instead he conducted the destructive accidental discharge testing that we've talked about before?
Well, he conducted a test that ultimately became destructive. It wasn't necessarily intended to be.
Understood. You were speaking with Ms. Morrissey before about a test that you and your son performed where you replaced the broken hammer, or you put the broken hammer back into the gun, and you otherwise put in a replacement sear and bolt. Do you remember that?
Yes,
Okay. And I believe you said you did that to isolate the damage to the hammer. Is that correct?
right. To see if that damaged hammer would even hold the full cock position.
Okay. And my understanding is you did not conduct a test to isolate the damaged trigger. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And would it even be possible to do a test like that at this point?
Well, it's always possible to put the broken trigger and a good hammer back in the gun. I saw no need to do that.
Is it your opinion that that test would be pointless given the current condition of the firearm?
Yes,
Ms. Morrissey showed you a series of videos earlier, and I understand that you've reviewed more than we reviewed here today. Do you recall that?
I do. And we only looked at a few today.
And have you said you reviewed about 20?
Yes, at least.
Do you know how many days Mr. Baldwin was on set?
No, not at this time. I may have at one time, but I don't today.
And you don't know how many days Mr. Baldwin's gun was fired on set, do you?
I do not.
You haven't seen all of the footage from Rust, have you?
I doubt it.
Okay, you've just seen what's been provided to you by the state, is that correct?
Yes,
And Ms. Morrissey mentioned some video from October 21st, but in the video from October 21st, Mr. Baldwin doesn't fire his gun, does he?
he does not.
I want to talk about this August 31st report. You referred to it as your third and final report. You sent that report to the state on August 31st, 2023, correct?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to show you what was submitted in the exhibit packet as Exhibit H, but I believe we're just going to be calling it Defendants 3. That's the number we're up to. Mr. Haag, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. And my understanding is this is subject to our prior stipulation, but this was again submitted as Exhibit H in the packet to the court. Mr. Haag, do you remember sending this email?
No, I don't. I accept it as mine, of course, but I don't remember it.
Okay, can you tell me about the condition or what prompted you to send the report on August 31st to the state?
Actually, it's the unhighlighted sentence that I think pretty well explains it. I try to anticipate cross-examination questions, whichever side I'm working for, anticipate what I might be asked if a person with similar expertise looked at evidence. So I could envision, and apparently did, someone looking at the broken parts, seeing those really egregious image marks on the sear tip and wanting to know, what do you think about those? Where do they come from? Why don't we hear any reports about them?
And it looks like you say here, Mike and I agreed that something needed to be memorialized. So was there a conversation between you and Mike about submitting this report?
Yes, I would say so.
And remind me who Mike is, please.
I didn't hear that question.
Is Mike your son?
Yes, I have two. He's my younger son.
And did Mike work? And Mike worked closely with you on your reports in this case, correct?
Yes, he did.
And Mike is an expert in his own right, correct?
Yes, he is, clearly.
Okay. And so you and Mike had a conversation about memorializing the odd tool marks on the evidence trigger. Is that correct?
Again, we're both reading the same sentence. I don't remember it, but I still stand by it.
Okay, and so is it fair to say that you volunteered to provide this report to the state?
I'm not sure if I volunteered it or said, shall I prepare a report? I just, frankly, too many things have I've done since then to remember that.
Okay, so other than this email, do you have any recollection of how the third report came about?
Not beyond, I think, what we've discussed both today and in an earlier interview this week.
Okay. This came up because you and Mike had observed odd tool marks on the evidence trigger, correct?
I missed that one again. Sorry, Sarah.
This came up because you and Mike observed odd tool marks, correct?
Oh, yes, we observed them long before that supplemental report was written when we first looked at the parts.
Okay, and I think that was around July 7th of 2023. Is that close?
Yes,
All right. And you authored two other reports in this case, correct?
yes,
One on October 2nd, or August 2nd, that is fairly lengthy.
yes.
And another one that is somewhat shorter on August 26th.
I believe you're correct. Yes, I don't have them in front of me. Those sound right. Those dates sound right.
And these odd tool marks didn't make it into either of those reports, correct?
That's right. Only the third one.
And you don't have any explanation for why those odd tool marks didn't make it in?
No, I didn't think they were that important. It's clearly damaged effects. But again, from this email, we decided let's get pictures of them so someone else can see them and realize that we didn't just blow them off or not consider them.
Okay, oh, so you assumed that this would be provided to the defense, correct?
Of course.
Okay. And do you understand that it wasn't in fact provided to the defense until May of this year after your son's interview?
I became aware there was some sort of a breakdown in communication between your office and Ms. Morrissey.
Can you explain what you mean by a breakdown in communication between my office and Ms. Morrissey?
Really, I'm kind of out of the loop on that. I was assumed that the report went forthwith to the defense. Didn't hear otherwise until there was this issue about belated discovery.
Okay, and you didn't mention this report in your prior interview when you and I spoke in April, correct?
You're going to have to, sorry, it's very scratchy still. Try it again.
Do you recall speaking to me in April?
I don't.
Okay. Do you recall doing an interview in this case?
I've been involved in several interviews. I do remember you visually, but again,
Okay.
I've done a lot of things since April. I don't dispute we had an interview. I just don't remember much about it.
You'd agree with me that if I tell you we had an interview on April 29th in this case?
I agree. I'm sure we
Okay.
did.
And in that interview, you didn't tell me about this third report, correct?
I don't even remember the interview.
Would you dispute that you did not tell me about this third report?
No, I would not. Don't have any way of doing that.
Okay, and you said you became aware of a breakdown. How did you become aware of that?
Just vaguely, as I sit here now, that there was a failure to disclose some kind of a snafu, and that was news to me. And this was sometime this spring.
And that was after you testified in Ms. Gutierrez's trial?
One more time.
After Ms. Gutierrez's trial,
I'm sorry, I still can't understand the question.
you learned about this breakdown in communication after you testified in Ms. Gutierrez's trial, the armorer.
Don't know. I really don't remember when it became an issue or of concern.
You don't know when you learned about this issue with the third report?
Not as I sit here today.
You don't remember if it was in the last month?
I doubt if it was in the last month, but again, I've got lots of other things I'm doing that occupy my thoughts.
You mentioned that you asked for an interview with Mr. Ziegler in connection with this third report. Do you remember that?
I do.
When did you make that request?
I'm not sure.
Did you make that request last year when you sent a list of items to the state that you needed to inform your opinion?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Did you speak? You didn't speak to Mr. Ziegler before Ms. Gutierrez's trial, though, did you?
No, I did not. In fact, most recently is the only time I've ever talked to him.
And so you didn't clarify those questions you had about the third report until this week, did you?
I don't believe so. Again, I'm still confused of where this is going, so I'm not very helpful.
Do you recall you testified in Ms. Gutierrez's case that other than the FBI testing, you didn't see any other modification or damage?
That's my opinion. I don't recall whether testifying to it or not, but that would be my opinion regarding the evidence gun. But the one exception, it has a nickel-plated hammer. Doesn't change the function, but it certainly makes the gun stand out when you watch the videos.
And when you testified at Ms. Gutierrez's trial, you had not yet spoken to Mr. Ziegler, is that correct?
That's true.
Okay, and so at that point in time, those markings were still unexplained, to use the words from your report, correct?
Yes,
Okay, and you never asked to speak to Mr. Ziegler to clarify those markings before you testified at Ms. Gutierrez's trial?
that's right. I did not ask to talk to him before the trial of the armor, only more recently when it became apparent this trial might go forward.
And do you recall telling me on April 29th of this year that the working surface of the sear looked as expected and normal?
I don't even remember the interview of the date you described. I remember seeing you, but beyond that, I don't remember anything from the interview.
If you told me in April that the working surface of the evidence sear looked expected and normal, would that be false?
Rebecca, I'm having trouble hearing the question.
I'm going to represent to you, and I can refresh you if you'd like, that on April 29th, you told me that the working surface of the sear looked as expected and normal.
I don't remember that, and I still haven't heard all of the question. I apologize, but the quality of the audio from you is really hard to hear.
Your Honor, I'm not having any difference in hearing the audio from Ms. Clark that I heard from Ms. Morrissey or anybody else today. And I'd ask to approach the bench if there's a way to approach remotely.
I hear you just fine, by the way.
Louder in person, but I'm doing my best.
I can try to speak lower. That's
I don't
the
think
only.
we can approach the bench on this. Why don't you turn your volume up to the max, both of you?
Mine is up as far as it goes.
Yeah, now it's over-modulating. It's loud, but some over-modulating.
We're at the point, Your Honor, where my concern is, of course, that the right to cross-examine the witness is being impeded by this. And between the remote nature of this, the fact that we're at the end of the day, I'm just going to alert the court. The defense is not going to, I understand that the court's time is precious, and I mean that genuinely, but the issues here are just too serious. And it's just too hard. It's just going to be one of those rare times in my career where I think there's something going on that just I can't let lie. And so the defense is not going to be resting today. We're going to be seeking to put other evidence before the court, just to alert the court of that.
Well, what do you mean other evidence? Completely. This is an issue of we need to fix the hearing, but other evidence before the court? I mean, I think you've interrupted enough. He's answered questions. You can repeat the questions that he hasn't asked. I'm just curious as to whether this can be corrected. Is there any other place you can go to, Mr. Haag?
No, I'm in a small office joining my home. I can hear Mr. Spiro, that's the way to pronounce it.
Is there any other office that you can go to, Ms. Clark?
I can try to call in from my phone. I will say I have not had this problem with anyone other than Mr. Haag, but I can try to call in from my phone and do the audio that way. Would that be preferable?
Yes, see if it works first of all, and then we can regroup on the questions.
Your Honor, counsel, can you guys hear me now?
All right, it's both Mr. Haag. Is that better?
That was better. See if the question.
All right, so listen to the questions. Go back at any point in time in your cross-examination, Ms. Clark, that you feel that you were not getting sufficient cross-examination because he could not hear or because of whatever other reason. Take your time.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Haag, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. It's a little better. So let's see how it goes.
Okay. I want to go back to when you noticed the damage to the evidence here. And I understand that that was early July, correct?
It would have been
Of-
the official exams in July of last year.
Okay. And I believe I understood you to explain to Ms. Morrissey that there was egregious damage to the working surface of the sear and that that is what is reflected in your third report. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. Do you recall doing an interview with me in April of this year, April 2024?
as I told you, I don't recall it. I don't dispute that we had one, but I just don't recall it.
Okay. And if you and you told me at that interview that the working surface of this sear looked as expected and normal. Do you recall that?
No,
Would that be a true statement?
I believe so. Yes.
That the working surface of this sear looked as expected and normal? That's true?
We're back to the same problem. I'm missing a word here and there. Sandy, do you mind if my wife stands here and sees if she hears it? Can't do that, eh? Okay. Judge says no, Sandy, go away.
Honor,
Okay.
I don't.
Hold on,
Sorry.
folks. Counsel, tell me if that is what you want to do.
As I've indicated, Your Honor, we're not going to be able, the defense is not going to rest today. So I would ask, and I understand, and I say this genuinely, the court schedule and fitting this in where we are in the lead up to trial, but the issues are just serious, and I'm not going to be able to rest today. So I would ask, even if we don't decide at this exact moment when there could be potentially another hour from the court, but given the hour, given the ability to cross-examine this witness, and given that there's going to be other arguments and evidence that we have to put in because of what's going on here today, we're not going to be in a position to rest today.
Can I ask, does the defense have other witnesses that you intend to call?
So I have to meet with my colleagues after this and decide, given what I think is going on here, which is troubling, to put it lightly. So I don't know exactly how this is going to proceed. Having practiced in many, many states, it's very rare that I'm put in a position where ports are hidden, witnesses change their answers in this kind of manner. And I hope the court will take this seriously. We're certainly taking it seriously. And I just cannot be in a position where we don't have a moment to confer and the court looks at me an hour past the end of the day and says, can you just rest? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to ask for more time. And so I'm just being direct with the court on where we are.
Well, that's not really germane to my question. My question is, we showed up to do a hearing today. I understand Mr. Spiro's concerns, but if the court tears a hole in its calendar and resets us, is the defense then going to show up with witnesses that we haven't interviewed?
Let me do this. Your plan, Mr. Spiro, was that you were going to use these three witnesses. And now I don't understand how, because he can't remember, you're going to be calling other witnesses. These are the three witnesses for this hearing. I am going to call this hearing again at 2:30 on Monday. And it's going to end at 5:30 no matter what. All right. Now I will see you back on Google at 2:30 on Monday. Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Your Honor.
Ms. Morrissey, Mr. Haag you have got to hook him up with some way better IT.
Understood.
This cannot happen again, or I will begin to enter confrontation issues.
Understood.
All right, thank you. We're in recess.
Thank you.
Your Honor.